right.
Two. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we connect with classrooms from land to talk about work on the Research Vessel Falkor out at sea in the Pacific Ocean. My name is Logan Mock-Bunning, and I'm on the communications team for Schmidt Ocean Institute. A big thanks to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants for getting us all together. We're excited to have students from all over North America joining us as we talk about science and research, as well as living and working on Research Vessel Falkor during a mapping and coral research expedition. Welcome to the students in Freehold, San Jose, Conquitlam, Silverdale, Anaheim, Lexington, and Roseneath. To get things rolling, a bit of background. The Schmidt Ocean Institute was established in 2009 and strives to advance the frontiers of ocean research and exploration through technological innovation, operational support, and open sharing of information. Our research vessel Falkor headed to the Phoenix Islands Protected Area, also known as PIPA, which is the largest and deepest UNESCO World Heritage Site on Earth. It's approximately the size of California, and PIPA was the first marine protected area of its kind. Created in 2008, it's about halfway between Hawaii and Tonga within the territorial waters of the Republic of Kiribati. I'd like to hand the presentation over to the researchers on board. Could you guys introduce yourselves and start telling us a little bit about your research?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Happy Halloween. Hi. So I'm Dr. Eric Cortez. I'm from Temple University in Philadelphia, and I'm the chief scientist on the expedition. We've been out here on the Falkor for the last month, going from Hawaii out to the Phoenix Islands Protected Area, and now we're actually on our way into Samoa to end the cruise tomorrow. So we've spent a lot of time finding some really amazing things that we're hoping to share with you today, but let me introduce my friends here.
Hi, everyone. Happy Halloween. I'm Dr. Randy Rogen. They're so cute. I work with the Phoenix Islands Protected Area and have for about 10 years. I'm from Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts. And let's see, this was a really great cruise. We've had a whole month at sea, and we have explored, I think the deepest we went was around 2,500 meters below the surface of the sea, all the way to the top. So we have a lot of exciting things to share with you guys today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Deborah Smith. I'm one of the marine technicians aboard Falkor. And it's my job on Falkor to help the scientists do their work by making sure that all of the scientific equipment that Falkor has on board runs and operates, collects data, and shares that data with the scientists so they can take it home and do all of this amazing study.
All right. So the big thing that we've been studying out here are corals in the deep sea. Corals are either colonial animals or solitary animals, which means they live by themselves or they live in big groups and form these colonies, but they are animals. They're down in the deep ocean, so there's no light down there. They rely on the food that rains down from the surface. You can see what looks like snow in this picture is called marine snow, and that's all the food that's produced in the shallow water by plankton that makes it down into the deep sea and feeds them. And you can see all these different corals and sponges that live there that are living in these colonies and growing and creating all sorts of habitat for other animals. This is one of my favorites. Oh,
I'm sorry, Eric, we're not seeing the slides. Can you maybe try to share your screen again?
All right. Let's try that again. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
And now we see.
We've been studying corals out here on seamounts. These are mountains that are under the ocean. They're big mountains, but they don't quite come to the surface. Are you seeing the pictures now?
Yes.
Yes, good. Excellent. This is one of those mountains that we were climbing with the remotely operated vehicle, the robot Sebastian. We control it from up on the ship, and it's connected by a really long cable that goes all the way down. And we can tell it to take pictures of things or collect samples for us. all sorts of stuff. This is the picture of one of my favorite corals. This is called Iridogorgia. It's this big spirally coral. And each one of those little dots you see on the branches is a separate coral animal. So they each have a mouth and they have little tentacles that they catch food with. And that big spirally shape is to keep them from overlapping with each other so they don't sort of fight over food. So they're a little bit further apart and they can catch all that snow that's falling down to feed them in that colony. So we found lots of different types of corals. This is also one of my favorites. I guess, I don't know, they're all my favorite. It's hard to really pick. This is just this beautiful purple color. It's called Victor Gorgia, and a lot of the other scientists that are out here are studying all of the animals that live with the coral. So there's a little squat lobster that lives over there. We're not exactly sure what the relationship is, but the corals create habitat for the lobster. We're not exactly sure what the lobster's doing for the corals, but it may help keep them clean, take other particles off of there, maybe keep predators away. And there's a big spiky sea urchin on the left there. And then all those squat lobsters that you see reaching out with their claws. Here's a big shrimp on one of the other types of corals. This is a bamboo coral, and if you look on the right, you can see the little black lines in between each of the hard skeleton segments. That makes it look a lot like bamboo. And then there are brittle stars up there on the upper right-hand corner that live along with the corals as well. There's a ton of brittle stars on this big purple Paramaricia coral. We know that in this relationship that the brittle stars are keeping the coral clean, that they take all the particles that the coral can't feed on and take them off of there and let the polyps, make it so that the polyps are able to continue feeding and they don't get all clogged up with all sorts of mucus and mud and other stuff that's raining down on them.
Oh, well, I get the moving pictures here. Yeah, so on the top, you can sort of see a very yellow, sort of almost feathery, flying, alien-looking thing. And this is actually an animal called a crinoid, a swimming crinoid. It's related to brittle stars, sea stars, urchins, sea cucumbers, and it can swim from place to place before it settles down and looks sort of like a feather flower on the bottom of the sea. On the top, other side, you can see a Dumbo Octopus. This is really small. This might be a juvenile or at least a young one. It's maybe, I think it was maybe just under. It was definitely under a foot, maybe half, as it was flying through. And you can see its big Dumbo-like ears, as ear flaps, as it's using to propel itself through the water. On the bottom landing, you see this orange fish, and it is a kind of angler fish, and it has sort of almost like a fishing rod on the top of its head that it can use to attract other prey right in front of its mouth before it eats them. And you can see it almost has feet, which of course are its fins, but it can use it in a really agile way. And in the bottom right, I think hopefully right for you too, you can see a really neat serrate octopus, which also is related, we think, to the Dumbo. It has sort of the same kind of ear-looking flaps, but it has a completely different morphology and really just has a beautiful way of sort of moving and propelling itself through the water. This is actually a really, I think we all are in love with this picture, and probably all for the same reason. Well, first, it's beautiful, but second, it represents a lot of work that we sort of spent looking for these kinds of corals for a long time on this expedition, and we finally found these big, huge, old coral colonies. They're the white skeleton, delicate, lacy-looking structure that you see set up on the rock. And they have a beautiful red Brazingid sea star on top and a yellow crinoid. It's the same kind that you probably saw swimming right in the previous slide. And we were so excited to find these because they are big. They're probably very old, at least hundreds of years old. And we were looking for them, and they only sort of live in a very specific habitat. So it was exciting. And you can see a squat lobster on the side of the rock. And I also want to point out one of our dear friends on this trip, the Oreo fish. Which is up in the top sort of bright and shiny in the middle. And this fish is sort of looks like a normal fish in this picture, but these fish are really ridiculous. They like to swim upside down. They like to swim sideways, kind of planerly, and they really enjoyed the lights of the submarine that we were not sub, but the robotic sub under the water, and were constantly joining us, and so it felt like we had friends in the water all the time. The Oreo fish. Deb, you want to take a couple?
The shark. Yeah, we got to see a lot of different sharks. There were, a couple of different species of sharks that we saw throughout many of the different dives. And it's always one of the exciting things. Everybody on board is always waiting to see the sharks come out of the dark. And they do. They kind of loom outside of the ROV area in view of sight, and then they sort of swim into the picture, which is really exciting. And we get to ooh and ah over it. And everybody comes running into the control room. Here's a very large ray. I was in the control room. There were a couple of times where these large rays just sort of swam by, and one came right in front of the ROV when it was up against a rock wall, and I think it made everybody in the room jump. It sort of jumps out at you when this really large creature just sort of swims by in its everyday life while you're investigating its habitat. Another Dumbo octopus, and I think these are some of my favorite. The octopus really are an amazing creature. The ability to sort of adapt to its environment and swim around and just be what I think seems to be always happy with where they are. And they lay eggs on corals, as Eric is whispering to me. Dr. Cortez is always bringing us back to the focus of corals. So what you're seeing right now is a before and after map. And this is actually where my background comes in, and one of the things I was really happy I could help out with on this trip. The Falkor has 2 sonars, and it uses sound to tell us how deep the seafloor is. And so essentially we send out a ping of noise, and it travels down to the seafloor, and then it travels back to the ship. And the time it takes for that sound to travel tells us how deep the seafloor is. And so we're able to collect really high definition seafloor maps that let us decide where to put the ROV. And you really need this because you're flying a vehicle about the size of a small car around maybe a giant mountain. And you need to make sure that you're not going to run into a cliff or into a cave or off of a ledge. And it lets us also find the really interesting features that coral may live on. So we really like those rocky ledges as much as the ROV pilots, I think, sometimes don't like flying them. The coral like to live on them. And so we always push the limits of where to explore and see exciting new geological features that they may find themselves on. This is the back deck, the aft deck, as we call it, of Falkor. And what you see here is the ROV team and the deck department team recovering Sebastian. So Sebastian is the ROV there between what we call an A-frame, and the A-frame can lift the vehicle out of the water. An ROV is tethered, so there's always a tether on the vehicle that sends all of the video and data and power to the vehicle down, and all of that information back up to the ship in real time. And that's how we're able to share our live YouTube videos with you. We send all of that video through that cable and then out to you over the internet. And I'm going to give this back to them.
Sure. So what you're looking at here is the arm of Sebastian, which is the name of the ROV, or remotely operated vehicle, the robot we've been using. And what it's doing is it's sampling a coral with a sea star on it. And the reason we're interested in taking this sample is because we don't know how corals are able to defend themselves against things that want to eat them, if at all. And we don't know when things start to eat them a little bit but don't finish, whether or not they maybe can get an infection or have different bacteria that will grow on them. And so we are really interested in taking a look at this interaction, both who is eating which coral, whether or not the coral can defend themselves, and how often it happens. So in order to make all of this happen, we all have to set up on the sub every day with ROV pilots who sort of set up sample collection vials, set up the robotics, set up the camera, make sure everything's working. And this is all of us checking it out before the expedition. But after every dive, a subset of us would go out and take all of the corals and the sediment samples and the water samples and the sea stars and the crabs and whatever else we were able to collect off so that we could study it in the laboratory.
And just there's so many different things here on the front of the submarine. You can see on the top there all the different lights that we brought down. It's so dark down there. We have to bring all of our own light. And these are super bright lights, but you can still only see maybe 30 or 40 feet in front of you. And we use all these great cameras that took all the pictures that you've been looking at and all the video. There's one up at the top in the middle, and there's one looking right at us. You can kind of see its little lens or its little eyeball. And we bring all these different types of sampling gear out with us to be able to bring samples back up from a mile down in the ocean. And what that's me looking at the front of the sub, or what we call the basket that catches all of our samples, and that's called a bio box. This is it's like a little cooler that we bring down to the deep sea, so we can put animals in it and close that lid, and they stay nice and cold when they come up, so they're nice and fresh, and we can process them and take a look at all the corals under a microscope. And we use different types of lights to see if they give off their own kind of light. It's really fun, and it's a long process to come up with all these different ways to bring animals back and keep them happy for a little while. All right. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Yesterday was actually Halloween for us. So we had a party last night. We had a little cookout. We did a little trick-or-treating and pumpkin carving. But we thought we would show up in costume for a little bit of this. So let's see. I guess we can take some questions from some of the students out there. If there's anything that you wanted to ask us that we could explain to you about our long voyage out here. One of the things that we haven't really talked about as we collect some questions, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Question, raise your hand. Sure, Ms. Hayashi or I will listen, and we'll see who has a question we want to ask.
In the world? Okay. Anybody else wondering?
Question. So you stand right here.
What was your question?
So let me explain just a little bit more about what we were doing. We are in the Phoenix Island protected area. And this is an area that was set up by the nation of Kiribati to protect all of the corals and the fish and the sharks that we were seeing and the octopus. So there is no fishing allowed anywhere within the protected area. It's this big square in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And it keeps humans, us, from going in there and damaging these places in any way. So it's this gigantic area that's all protected, and there's no fishing, so we get to, that's why we saw so many fish and so many sharks, and we get to look at these deep water coral reefs really in their unaffected condition, the way they naturally are without people. Very few people have ever been to this area, and they're so far out in the ocean that we think we're looking at something that people really haven't impacted, which is just really rare on Earth these days. All right, do we have some questions now? Are we ready?
Yes, it looks like Ms. Fraser has a question.
Go ahead. Oh, can you bring the mic up, please? You can go ahead and ask.
How's the coral reef an animal?
How is it an animal? Well, let's see. It's it has a mouth, those tiny little polyps that we were seeing. Each one has a mouth, and they have a whole bunch of little arms around it, and they have muscles, and they grow attached. They can't really make their own food unless they have a symbiosis, a relationship with algae or bacteria or something like that. So just like you, they have to eat all the time to get enough energy to be able to move around and to grow.
All right, let's go to Miss Piscatelli's class.
Hi. How long did it take you to build the robot, or like the robot submarine?
So there were a whole bunch of engineers that worked on it. They had they asked a bunch of scientists for their input as well when they were building the submarine. So I got to help them think about what they wanted on the sub and pick out the kinds of arms and the kinds of cameras and lights and everything that they put on there. And that was about a year ago, and it took them, there was a lot of planning that went into it and engineers drawing everything, and then they built the robot in about 9 months. And then they brought it out here, and it's only been running for about a year now. And we, out here on this trip, we did 20% of the dives that the robot has ever done. And I think we finished on dive number 83 was the last one that we did.
Okay, thank you. Let's get Mr. Sinclair's class.
What's the hardest part about spending so much time on a boat?
Well, I think the hardest part for me is I miss my kids and my wife. My son is about to turn 8, and I'll make it home just in time for his birthday. My daughter is 5.5, and I really miss them when I'm out here. I get to talk to them every once in a while, and I saw pictures of them this morning. They were dressed up as Harry Potter and Minnie Mouse when they went to school today. So it's wonderful being out here. I love it. It's one of my favorite things, but it's also very difficult to be away from our friends and family.
That's exactly the same. I have 2 kids as well. I have an almost 6-year-old and an almost 3-year-old dressed up as a fire truck and as Tafiti from Moana, and yeah, it's the hardest thing to be away, but it's also amazing to be doing what you love and be on the ocean in a place where you get to explore new places, do some science, and contribute to the world. So it's good both ways, but it's hard to be away from the family.
Sure. Yeah, so my answer is probably a little bit different than theirs. I live here for half of the year, so my job is here on Falkor, and I spend 2 months on Falkor, and then I get to go home for 2 months. So yeah, I miss family and friends, but I find it really exciting to be at sea and to be able to meet all different types of new scientists and see new equipment and explore the ocean. Every trip is different and new, and so those 2 months tend to fly by really fast when there's exciting things like ROV dives and searching for corals. And then I go home for a couple of months and get to spend time with family, and then I come back. So yeah, it's all about doing what you love, finding something that you really are excited about, and doing that.
Yeah, but if you're going to be at sea for a long time, this is a great ship to be on. It's very comfortable. They have amazing food. It's really one of my favorite ships to sail on, for sure.
How about a question from Mrs. Graves? Go ahead.
Oh, so go ahead now.
Okay, try it one more time.
How many animals have you collected?
Wow, how many animals have we collected? I think what did we finish up with?
I don't remember the final tally. Who won?
I think it was 440 different samples, and those were different types of corals, different types of squat lobsters and worms and brittle stars, and we collected a lot of water so that we can tell what kind of environment they're living in. We collected some rocks so we could tell how old the seamounts were. We collected some old, almost fossils of some clams and some corals that had been down there for a really long time. So it's going to take us a long time to look at all that stuff when we get home. It'll take us years to get through all the samples we collected over the last month. Good question.
And we've got a question from Miss Devine's class as well.
Where are you in the...
Oh no, he dropped.
We are out in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. So we're about 250 miles north of Samoa. And we're trying to pull up a map for you right now. But we are just south. We were working just south of the equator and just barely in the western hemisphere.
There we go.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, there we go.
Oh. Let's see. Are you sharing it? We're kind of halfway between California and Australia, which is a long way. So there you can see where the Phoenix Islands are. We left Hawaii, and it took us 6 days to get here from Hawaii. We went as far as, we basically crossed the country. If you were to drive across the United States, we went about that far from Hawaii to the Phoenix Islands. And now we're going south from the Phoenix Islands to Samoa, where we will get into port tomorrow morning. So really remote area of the world in the middle of nowhere, in the nation of Kiribati.
All right, do we have a question from Mr. Windhoff's class?
There you go. Right up, bud.
How when you go down in the submarine, does it not like explode? Like from all the pressure on the water?
We use lots of different types of submarines in deep sea science, and some of them are manned. And I've been lucky enough to go inside of a submarine down into the deep sea a bunch of times. Those submarines are made with really thick titanium spheres that you get into, and it seals you in, and then that really thick, really strong metal can keep the pressure out. But this is a robotic submersible, so it's unmanned. It's connected by a long fiber optics, and we send power down to it, and we send commands down to it from the pilots, and then it sends video back up and data back up from all of the different instruments we have on there. So the cameras and some of the instruments all need to be in little pressure chambers to keep them at 1 atmosphere and to keep the water out, because it's not good when you dunk your camera in the water. But in this case, we weren't sending people down, we were just sending the robot down, sort of like exploring another planet.
How about a question from Miss Fraser's class?
Where do you get the power from?
Where do we get the power from? We're on a really large ship, and the ship has 2 main engines that drive the propellers to get us around, and it has how many?
I don't know that. I'm not an engineer, but we have 2 actually brand new generators. We just put them in. We had some time in Portland, Oregon, where we were in shipyard, and we just put 2 brand new generators. And we also have a science generator. So there are, I think, 4 different generators on board, but 2 primary, and that provides all of the power for the entire ship. So it's what keeps the lights on. And we have an amazing team of engineers who do that. They literally keep the lights on every day by making sure that the engines are running. So the engines run, and then the generators store that power, and then they share it out to the light bulbs and the phones and the TVs and Sebastian.
Great. How about a question from Miss Piscatelli's class?
All right. Let me get the mic going.
You're good.
How many types of coral are there?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, one of the things we were doing on this expedition is trying to find out. And the truth is that we don't know. We were able to identify a lot of these corals to genus, and some of them to family, and some of them to species, but very few of those. And so one of the things that Eric is doing, Dr. Cortez is doing with his students, is trying to identify all the different kinds of corals. And everybody here is trying to figure out something a little bit different about them, and trying to understand not just who they are, but who they associate with, and how they do what they do. But I can't give you a number because we're still trying to figure it out.
Thank you.
You're
And Ms.
welcome.
Graves, do you guys have a question?
Think what's your rarest animal that you found?
Rarest animal. I don't know. I think I'm not sure, but for me, I think the rarest animal that I think I saw was the acorn worm, which was a small little flat worm. It was purple. It kind of almost looked like a little bit of a purple angel with some with a trail behind it of its poop, frankly, and of sandy poop. And but it was so rare that it had never, until a few years ago, nobody had ever really been able to see one alive on the seafloor. And we saw two right next to each other, and it was really exciting to see an animal that up until now had only been it's so thin and gelatinous, and it's like jelly, right? It just breaks. And so people had brought up pieces of them in nets before, but it was really exciting to see an animal that very few people get to see.
Well, there were so many. We saw so many new animals and ones that we think are brand new species. So we don't even. They're so rare that no one had ever seen them before. And my favorite was a new type of coral that we found that I did not recognize at all. I've been studying coral for a long time, and I still don't know what this thing is. It looked really different. It had plates and almost scales on the outside, like a dinosaur. I really don't know what it is. What was your favorite?
I think all of the different species of octopus. I think there's still, we saw a new kind of what we think maybe a juvenile octopus, but we're not really sure. And so experts are looking into it. But I think, yeah, just being able to see all the different variety of animals.
Thank you.
Let's get a question from Mr. Windolf again.
How deep can the submarine go?
The submarine is rated to go 4,500 meters down, and that is almost 3 miles down in the ocean. That's very, very deep. We didn't have a chance to go down quite that deep on this cruise, but that's how deep it can go with all of the different housings for the cameras and things are capable of going that deep. And then after that, they would implode.
How about Miss Fraser? Do you have a question?
So, ask your question.
What's the thing about your favorite job?
My favorite part about my job? It really is going out to sea and seeing all these new animals. I mean, this was such an amazing opportunity. This place had never been explored before. So every minute that we were out here, that we had the submersible down in the deep sea, we were seeing something that no one has ever seen before. And that was just, it's an amazing feeling to be exploring and knowing that you're seeing something that no one's ever seen. That's really my favorite part.
I called it a discovery a minute the other day, and I think that's really true, because every time you turn a corner, you're seeing some, you're adding to the overall pool of what we understand about these habitats and these ecosystems. My favorite part of my job is it's the exploration of new animals and new spaces, but it's also the idea that immediately we turn that to conservation. So we can use all of this information not just for science and research, but also to help protect this really special place on the planet, and not just this place, but every place. Because the more we understand about how the world works, the better we're able to protect it.
What about you, Deb?
I think my favorite thing about my job is being able to see all of the variety of different types of science and research that can happen. I think one of the really amazing things that Falkor lets scientists do is explore things and explore places they may not be able to do in a lab. And so being able to take a variety of different people from all different backgrounds and see all of this amazing different science, whether it be using a remotely operated vehicle or a remote plane, a drone, or whether it's to use a CTD, a conductivity temperature depth measure, the seawater, all of the different types of equipment and scientific research happening is really my favorite part, is being able to see that, being able to be here and really experience the diversity and to always learn something new. One of the most amazing things is every day on Falkor, I learn something new, whether it's something about my job or something about the ocean or something about a new piece of science. There's always constantly new exploration happening.
Okay, Miss Devine's class.
Have you seen underwater volcanoes before?
Underwater volcanoes? Yeah, so I have seen hydrothermal vents, and these are around areas where you have volcanoes, or you have areas where the continental plates are splitting apart, and there are eruptions along this long line on the seafloor. And the magma from the center of the Earth is so close to the crust that it heats the water up, and the water comes out. It's still liquid because it's under so much pressure, but it comes out at 4 times the boiling point of water at 1 atmosphere. And it's really amazing. There are some incredible animals that are capable of living down there. So that's as close as I've gotten to a volcano. Have you seen a real volcano? Oh, well, yeah, that's true. We saw a few 80-million-year-old volcanoes on this trip. We were on volcanoes. They weren't active volcanoes. They're extinct volcanoes, so they're not erupting anymore, unfortunately. I was hoping to see one blow up, but they were blowing up 80 million years ago.
But that's a really good question also, because our next research cruise will be searching for underwater volcanoes. So you need to tune in December, and hopefully we will get to see one of those. Let's head over to Mr. Sinclair's class.
What's the most abundant coral you find, and what's the average life expectancy of a coral?
What was the first part of the question? The most abundant. I don't know what the most abundant coral was.
Right now?
Yeah, there were some that we saw that were pretty common, that we saw at most of the sites that we went to. That big spirally one that we showed you at the beginning, we saw quite a few of those.
I know
What was it?
What's the average lifespan, or what's the expected lifespan? The lifespan of the coral is another. We have a lot of I don't knows for you today. But let's see. There are some that we know that can live for thousands of years. There are some that we know that are living for hundreds of years, and we saw some babies too. Some corals which are probably less than a year old. So we saw corals that span the range, but the average lifespan for each coral species, there's still a lot of work to be done to answer that.
And Ms. Fraser's class, do you have a question?
How did you become a scientist? I don't know.
What was that? Ask that again.
How did you guys become a scientist?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think you guys are asking questions just like a scientist would ask, right? We have all these I don't knows because we're asking exactly the same ones, and we're trying to figure things out. And so I just stayed curious, and I knew that a career in science was going to work for me. So I went to college, and then I went to graduate school. Then you do a postdoc, and then you get to run a research lab. And what that really means is that you're the one asking questions and trying to put together the, all of the tools and the resources you need to answer them. And so I had a pretty straightforward path, but it always started with curiosity and passion.
I started being a marine biologist when I was in 2nd grade. That was my first science project, was a marine biology project, and I stuck with it the whole time. So You guys can start right now.
I became a scientist because I wanted to explore ocean technology. I've always been really interested in the ocean, but more so than the ocean, than the tools to explore the ocean. And so I went to Maine Maritime Academy and have a bachelor's of marine science. And then after that, I got into mapping the seafloor. So for a very many number of years, I learned and worked at a company making charts to help boats not run aground, essentially, updating charts. And then it took me to Falkor and then into the world of marine technicians. And so, again, about ocean technology and being able to use equipment to explore the ocean.
Mr. Windolf, does your class have a question? You guys are looking pretty frightening today.
My question is, have you discovered any new species?
Yeah, well, we discovered quite a few new species, we think. There were a few corals that we didn't recognize that we think are new. There were some crabs that we think are new. There was a shrimp that we think might be new. It takes us a long time to figure out what these species are after we get them home, to the lab. So we won't really know the final number of species that we found for some time.
Miss Gray, do you guys have a question?
Why do the corals need to defend themselves?
How to what defend themselves?
The question is, why do corals need to defend themselves?
There are a lot of different things that eat corals, and that's one of the things that Randy studies. And they have these little stinging cells inside their tentacles that can defend them from predators like
snails and sea stars, and in the shallow waters, fishes, maybe even in the deep too. I don't know. We actually did see one fish. Yeah, it's a little different. And lots of little worms and little jellies that can probably, we think a bunch of people have sort of recently started looking at a potential predatory jellyfish on corals. And there's a whole lot of things that eat these corals, or that can eat them, and corals can't run away. They're stuck in one spot, and so they have to defend themselves without running away. And so they do that with chemistry, and they do that with physical structure. They can be spiky, so that nobody wants to eat them, or they can taste bad, or they can sting something that's trying to eat them. So the best way to, if you can't run away, you can use chemistry or a structure.
Miss Fraser,
I love the costumes.
Miss Fraser, do you guys have a question?
How does coral breathe?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, corals have what's called gas exchange, and and that means that they can move oxygen over their tissue layers, and take in oxygen that way. They're animals; they need oxygen like everything else. But in the deep sea, there's a lot less oxygen available than there is up here at the surface, and so I don't know if they have increased. You probably know better than I do. Whether or not they have, they think they can just live in these low oxygen environments, and their gas exchange is just works a little bit differently, I would imagine, in terms of what their oxygen requirements are. But yep, they can just move gases across boundaries. They don't have lungs or gills.
Let's try one more to wrap it up. Mr. Windolf, do you guys have one more question?
Do you ever get scared when you go underneath the water?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Do you ever get scared when you go underneath the water, like if you're gonna hit anything?
Yes. So the ROV pilots are really good, and they're incredible drivers, but everybody gets a little scared when we're working on vertical walls with lots of caves and overhangs. And so we really, I always tell my kids that the number one rule of driving is don't bump into anything. And it's true for ROV driving too. So we're always trying not to make sure that we don't hit a wall. When we're scuba diving underwater, which is something we didn't really do very much on this trip, everybody's always worried about sharks and things like that. But it's really the crocodiles you got to watch out for. So sharks are usually pretty friendly. So yeah, but in this case, it's mostly, I think, sharp walls that we're trying to avoid.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That was a wonderful talk. We are running out of time. There is an opportunity to continue the conversation. We have social media channels. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Those are all at Schmidt Ocean. And then we also have a website, which is www.schmidtocean.org. And on there, you can ask questions assigned to scientists and send us feedback and see what we're doing, including the live dives we do with ROV Sebastian. So thank you very much, everybody. If you have any questions, hit us up on social media or our website, and hopefully we'll see you on the next cruise. Thank you. And happy Halloween.
Bye.